Hello everyone, I hope you're doing well. We will be covering Chapter 11, Key Issue 3 today. Key Issue 3 is another really long key issue, so we are going to divide it into at least two parts. We'll see how much we get through in about 15 minutes, and then we'll evaluate from there whether this needs to be divided into 2 videos or 3 videos. We shall see. But don't forget to jot down some notes and send me a picture. All right, so this key issue looks at our energy supply. We've talked in a previous key issue about how we depend primarily on fossil fuels to power our machines, our factories, our automobiles, our electricity in our homes. We pretty much run on fossil fuels. And so this key issue is looking at our current energy supply. And 2 issues are at the forefront for geographers when considering natural resources. And the first one is that we deplete scarce resources, especially petroleum and coal, but also natural gas, which is a burnoff of petroleum. We are depleting these resources, which are not renewable. So eventually they will run out. The second issue is that we can destroy natural resources through pollution of the air, water, and soil. And so we'll be looking at that in this key issue as well. All right, so the first thing to note is that fossil fuel resources are not uniformly distributed. That means that they are not evenly found across the earth. They are clustered in certain places. Coal, for instance, is formed in lush, swampy, tropical areas, places that are rich in plants because it comes mostly from plant residue. China is actually the producer of half of the world's coal, and this is actually why the steel industry is so prominent in China, because their steel factories run on coal. Petroleum, which is found on the seafloor, is mostly found in Russia and Saudi Arabia. They have about 1/4 of all the world's petroleum supply. And there's still some petroleum in the Persian Gulf and the North Sea, and then other reserves that are located way, way, way far down beneath the waters on the seafloor. And then natural gas, which is a burn-off of petroleum, also comes from the seafloor. And so this is a flammable gas, mostly methane and other hydrocarbons. Then these are used as fuel. And so butane, propane, methane, most of this is supplied by Russia and Southwest Asia. That is the Middle East, like Saudi Arabia. And the United States, of course, is highly dependent on all 3 of these fossil fuels. And this is looking at coal production across the Earth. You can see China and the United States are major producers of coal. This one is looking at petroleum production. We said that Russia and the Middle East, or Russia and Saudi Arabia, you can see have this darkest green color here. This is where a lot of the world's petroleum reserves are found. And then natural gas production, still Russia, but also the United States is a large producer of natural gas. Okay, and this is just showing that we use a whole lot of fossil fuels for energy. About 90% of US energy comes from these 3 fossil fuels. You have nuclear power, you have petroleum in green, natural gas in purple, and then coal in brown. And so look at this. In the year 2000, and this would be, I guess, 2010, you can see most of our energy comes from these 3 fossil fuels. All right, so industry relies on the availability of low-cost energy. And the reason why is because it requires a whole lot of energy to operate factories, and not only to operate the factories, but also to transport materials to factories and then finished manufactured goods from the factories to the consumer. So we are using energy at pretty much every level of production and shipping. So the demand for energy comes from 4 places. Number 1 is industries, Factories use about 40% natural gas and 30% coal and 30% petroleum. Transportation. Almost all transportation systems, airlines, automobiles, all of that, truckers, all of this runs on petroleum products. Also our homes. We have, our homes are heated by natural gas and coal. And so natural gas is used to heat and cool homes, and then electricity comes mostly from coal. And then commercial uses. So stores and offices also have uses that are similar to homes, and so they use electricity and natural gas as well. All right, developing countries now use more energy than developed countries. And so for the first time in 2006, the switch was made where developing countries use more energy than developed countries. China, of course, is the world's leader in energy demand, and that is simply because they have about 1 billion people living there. And so interestingly, though, even though they use more energy, we have developed countries have the highest per capita consumption. So even though they use more energy, we use more per person than they do in developing countries. All right, and this is looking at the world's energy demand, and you can see developing countries in green are using most of the world's energy, and then developed countries in purple use less, and this switch happened in 2006. All right, this is looking at world energy use per capita. And so this is kind of a flip-flop graph here. And you see, in this case, developed countries are using more energy per capita, which means per person. And so even though developing countries use more energy overall, we use more per person. And this is a projection of what our future energy demand looks like. And you can see that the developing countries will continue to skyrocket in their energy demand, and developed countries are increasing, but at a more modest rate. All right, so looking at challenges of petroleum. Okay, so most of the world's petroleum is produced by the Middle East and North Africa and Central Asia. And the thing is, these are areas where there's a whole lot of conflict. There's religious conflict, ethnic conflict, political conflict, and we, the United States, who are dependent on these places for oil, are sometimes impacted by the conflicts that are going on in these countries. Several developing countries who have these petroleum reserves created OPEC, which is Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries. And this happened in 1960. And the point of this was so that these countries could have more control over their own reserves. Because even though the reserves are in Southwest Asia, North Africa, Central Asia, the companies there were United States and European countries. And so even though the oil itself was in the Middle East, the United States had a lot of control over the profits because they're the ones that set up transnational companies to control the oil and to process the oil. And so as OPEC has taken over and nationalized these oil fields, world oil prices have actually increased sharply on several occasions, even though right now, of course, gas prices are very low in the United States, especially when you adjust for inflation. So that's actually a good thing. So this is looking at proven and potential reserves. So because petroleum and natural gas and coal are underground, it obviously requires lots of skill and technology and money to first find it and then to extract it. And so a proven reserve is a reserve that has already been discovered. Based on the coal that we have, that we know that we have in the earth, the proven reserves, there's about 1 trillion metric tons of coal. And at the current demand, these proven coal reserves will last for about 130 years. Developed and developing countries each have about half of the supply. And then natural gas, the world reserves are about 200 million cubic meters of natural gas. at the current demand, based on what we know we have, this proven reserve, natural gas will last about 56 years. And then petroleum, with approximately 1.6 trillion barrels at current demand, will last about 55 years. So potential reserves are thought to exist. So this would be like an oil field that is undiscovered, but based on what we know, they think it exists somewhere. And then once a potential reserve is discovered, it is actually reclassified. So it goes from being a potential reserve to a proven reserve after it's discovered. These fields that are yet to be developed are typically, or what we believe is there, is small and it's remote. And it will be costly to extract because what is left in the potential reserves is way far deep beneath the seafloor. And so the extraction of both types of these fields, whether it's small and remote or it's way buried deep beneath the sea, would be really expensive to extract. Okay, so the world oil trade. Right now, the largest flows of oil go from Russia to Europe, and then from the Middle East to Europe and Japan. The United States and Europe both import about or more than half of their petroleum, and Japan, which is an import-heavy country, imports more than 90% of its petroleum. And so with the demand increasing in developing countries, these developed countries, like the United States, are facing greater competition. The problem is that these developing countries that are demanding oil, that are low on the HDI scale, meaning they are low developing countries, need energy resources, but they can't pay for them. So this is very problematic in developing countries. So in developed countries, there's actually been a decrease in the demand for petroleum through conservation. It's not that they don't need petroleum, but it's that they are looking for other ways to provide energy for their factories. And so factories have reduced their demand for petroleum by switching to natural gas. Another way that developed countries have cut the demand for petroleum is that they have governments will put regulations in place that make it so that cars have to have higher gas mileage. Like when cars are produced, they have to have higher gas mileage so that people will use less gas while driving. All right, so we are nearing the 15-minute mark, so that'll be all for today. Don't forget to send me a picture of your notes, and you guys have a great weekend.